Okay, I think we can just launch ourselves into this conversation. Welcome. Welcome to today's Cinelink Talks, hosted by the Sarajevo Film Festival, Documentary Campus, and also Screen International, with Orlando Parfit, who's helping me behind closed doors. I'm Paula Vaccaro. It's so good to be with you again. This is the Cinelink Talk, and the Cinelink Talks is a program of 11 webinars for the festival's 2020 industry strand, and is running and has been running since August 15th to August 20th, which was moved online because of COVID. And you can check out the full schedule and register for the upcoming events at screendaily.com/Cinelinks Talks. And you can follow it on social media on hashtag Cinelink Talks and SFF Online, which means Sarajevo Film Festival. This talk will last 1 hour, and we will have 20 minutes for questions from the audience at the very end. So please make this talk also yours by leaving your questions on the Q&A box, and I will go through them as many as possible. We will be finishing on time, on the dot. And welcome to today's talk, which is a conversation with Veena Sud. And this is one of the luxuries, if you like, about this pandemic, because Veena is such an iconic creator, and she is on the other side of the planet. She's in, for us in Europe, she's in LA. And Veena is a showrunner and director and known to audiences worldwide for shows like The Killing and 7 Seconds and The Strangers, and is someone I truly admire. And I hope that you will enjoy yourselves with these conversations where Veena will share her experiences about surviving as an artist and woman of color in the United States with its troubled and fraught history of race and immigration. And also, we will discuss how the intersectionality of race and ethnicity and gender has shaped her work, and the dance that the Black and Indigenous and people of colors artists do in an industry that has historically been and is now dominated by the white male filmmakers and their gaze. So without any more ado, I am so honored to have you, Veena, here. Thank you so much for making time.
It's a real pleasure to see you again and to be here, and especially to be able to talk to the audience of filmmakers and industry folk about what's going on in our industry at this really historic time worldwide, and certainly in the United States. I know I have a bit of a talk. It's quite short, and it's more about laying the table for maybe a richer conversation, but just very briefly, in terms of my own experience, I've been thinking a lot, about race and immigration, and being a woman of color in this industry since we started to talk about the subject for our conversation. And one thought that has really stayed with me is this notion that so much of the opportunities I've had in my work and my career have really been because of everyone who's come before me, other artists of color who've really laid the groundwork for the next generation to come in. And I'll be very specific about that because I think that will inform what we need to do in our industry moving forward to have radical and real change. And not be in the same place we are now that we were in 50 years ago, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago. So I came into this industry, initially being really turned off as a young filmmaker. I went to undergrad and immediately started, in the film program. And in my first class, I knew that film, or I felt that film was not for me. I was the only woman in an all-male class. I was certainly the only person of color. And we were watching a Brian De Palma film. And the first image I had when I walked into the classroom was a woman getting killed with a roto-rooter in her underwear. So I knew, there was something in me that told me to flee from that room. And I gave up a dream that I'd held for a really long time to write and direct film and television, because it was so terrifyingly not a world for me. And I took a circuitous route, for many years. After that, continued to write, but as a journalist in New York, had a child, and that I could feel the longing to create fiction, stay with me. So I had the great fortune to start working at a place called Third World Newsreel, it's a film and video distribution and production center in New York that was founded in the 1960s and was distributing the documentary films on the Black Panthers and the Young Lords, and the First Nations movement and the women's movement. Young filmmakers, young filmmakers of color, right in the heart of the movement back then. And, here was this vast and incredible repository of history, of film history, that I had no idea existed. It certainly wasn't in the kind of the mainstream conversation or distribution channels. So as a young woman, young single mom, I would just sit there at night after I was done working and watch, and watch women and people who look like me, and people in my neighborhood, pick up video cameras, and tell our stories. And it made it all so possible, and also doable. And at the time, this was in the 90s, I think Leslie Harris had just come out with Just Another Girl on the IRT, which was revolutionary for so many indie filmmakers to see that the indie world was not just the world of the white kind of dude, in his 20s, sitting in a mall or sitting in a 7-Eleven, but really could be used for all of our voices. So that propelled me to believe that I could too. I went to film school. And when I graduated, I had a wonderful friendship and mentorship with Tom Fontana, who created Oz and Homicide: Life on the Street. He's very supportive of young kind of filmmakers and TV writers. And through the mentorship that I had with him and visiting set and seeing female directors directing Oz, I applied to the Disney Fellowship. The Disney Fellowship was founded as a way to deal with, in the early aughts, the radical racial disparity in our industry. So this was almost 20 years ago. And I benefited, and many other writers of color and women benefited from being in the program, because it was a way to open the door to underrepresented folk, to come in. And so that was really the beginning of coming to Los Angeles, being in the heart of the industry, having access to opportunities. And every step along the way since then has been, my first job was with Meredith's team on Cold Case, which is a CBS show in 2002. And Meredith was a very young woman who created this show on her own, fought for it dearly, and also staffed as she saw fit. And so to be in a room on my first paid staff job with a showrunner who saw me as a human being and as a writer, and not as a charity case or not as the woman hire or the minority hire, but seriously just saw me as a writer, was extraordinary and very rare, according to my colleagues who were coming into the industry, other women and women of color at the time that I was. So it was an amazing opportunity and really blessed along the way to have so many opportunities, again, that were founded on the efforts of the people who came before me. And so from that, the three things, worth discussing, I think, today and more is how critical opportunity is. Many opportunities, not just one and then you're done, to kind of open up the doors of our industry to true representation of what this country looks like and what the world looks like. Mentorship is really critical. It's something that I do, and a lot of filmmakers of color do, and showrunners, because we see how valuable it's been for us to really be guided along the way, and to have to jump over the hurdles that are specific to us. And the most important thing, and I cannot emphasize this enough, because I think sometimes these ideas of mentorship and opportunity and education become excuses for not really critically looking at the power of our industry and where that power resides is a truly level playing field. And what I mean by that is, for many decades in the industry, and I was obviously, benefited from that, there's always been the fellowship, right? The Disney fellowship, the CBS fellowship, the opportunity, let's bring in, a few from outside to be part of, rather than what is the systemic problem in our industry in terms of who holds the reins of power. So thankfully, for BLM right now, there has been that questioning in all kind of facets of American society. Where does the power reside? Where does the money reside? Who's making the decisions? Who's in control? And so that's worth talking about, because I think that there's been, the old kind of tired, let's create let's be more, let's educate people more, let's, give them more opportunities, the small handful of group of select, people, versus let's really look at who are the power brokers in our industry, and why does it look so much like the 1950s and the Trump administration rather than America. So on that note,
on that note, let's just talk about the state of the industry in the US on that exact note, because it is amazing. Recently, someone gave me this photo of the execs. I think it was actually my husband, who's also a writer, and we were looking at changing in the industry, and he says, "Look at this! This is amazing!" And the photo of all the decision makers of all the studios in the US were, of course, there were some women now, but they were all white, at least white looking, passing white. So it made me think very carefully before saying times are changing. How do you see this? What needs to change? Like, beyond what's obvious to the eye, right? And how do you see the industry, of course, in concerns to race and in concerns to gender as well?
I mean, you said it all with that photograph, right?
Yeah.
And again, there's lip service because, there are fellowships that exist that bring in baby writers of color or women to stay at the lower ranks, right? Like, we're not seeing an advancement in terms of, I mean, there is advancement, but it's very small. So there's an organization in the US called Color of Change, and they're incredible. They did a study a few years ago of TV writers' rooms. And what they found was 85% were still predominantly white, and 90% were still run by men. And so those numbers, if we look at them, don't even reflect the demographics of our population at all. Of course. And again, I keep saying, let's look at the actual numbers, and marvel and wonder at why one of the most liberal industries in America looks like the inside of our current White House. Why is that? Why is that? It just blows my mind. And I think partially why that happens is because there has not been a systemic kind of overview, like you said in the photograph, of really where is the lack of representation on all levels of the industry. So it's not enough to say, yay us, we've created this fellowship in our company and we've brought in 5 writers of color, or 2 women into the writing pool this year. I think it's really important to say, let's look at the writers' rooms, which we've been doing now for a bit, but also let's look at who is greenlighting shows and films. Let's look at the rank and file in the studio system. Let's look at the rank and file in networks. Let's look at the rank and file in the agencies, because the agencies have a lot of power in terms of directing what writers, will go into the pipeline of employment.
Absolutely.
And really, this one other thing that we don't talk about at all is let's look at the rank and file of the entertainment journalists, and the critics. that is the fourth estate, in our industry. Absolutely. And where are, the critics, cultural and film and TV critics of color? Where are the women? Where are the editors in chief? And there are some, but again, it's really, if we look systematically at those numbers, do they really represent the population and the demographics of this country? They do not.
Well, and beyond the country, I think Europe is in a state of shambles in that respect as well. When you look at in here, the conversations sometimes haven't even started. So we're faced with who's going to propel the change. And I think I remember when we first met some years ago, this idea of female showrunners having the wolf pack group. That they were helping each other and telling each other what's good and what's not. It really stayed with me for so long. And even until today, I think that's the only way, right? Collaboration, collective support, intel from like real meaning of giving this, just not just mentorship and not just opportunity, but a real meaning of a sense of collaboration and knowing where your allies are when you actually support them with what you know. And that shared knowledge is so important. Do you still feel that is like that is the way forward?
I think that's one very important community to cultivate, and I'm really fortunate to be part of that community here in the US in terms of women showrunners. I think that those informal networks have to some degree always existed, and the underground conversation has always existed. But again, I think now with the uprising and BLM, it's not about just those underground systems existing and supporting each other kind of through the fray of whiteness and maleness, but again, taking power. And not just circumventing power. So again, like it's one thing I've thought about a lot is the whole conversation about the dearth of women directors in our industry and how there's been so much pushback, and especially in the television space. And I'm very, was very much on the front lines of seeing this happen against women directors, where that came from and how I believe it was the ACLU sued the studios a few years ago for lack of representation and discriminatory hiring. And so to see that this battle and this, change in our industry comes on many fronts, so that we have the underground networks, which are speaking the truth and being transparent in terms of what we're all going through. So we have shared information, but also that there's advocacy outside of kind of us inside the industry, advocacy outside that recognizes there is a real problem in this industry that for some reason no one has touched for many years. And so it was very informative to see the ACLU with their lawsuit and to see how the studios reacted off of that. Power concedes nothing but to power. So that was definitely a power move.
Yeah, I mean, the whole idea of circumventing power or actually going for it, it makes me think, of course, of gatekeeping. And as you said, gatekeeping, of course, starts, depends on where you look at it, but when you have a product that's already out, when you have a show that's already out, the gatekeepers start again from the reviewers when they decide if all the work that you put there is worthy or not. Somehow we have that kind of system in place to check, control, and make sure that things don't really change, because the reviewers are a revolving door many times of the previous film programmers, and film programmers go back and review, and reviewers go back and film program, and then at the same time they can become as well executives. And it's kind of this mechanism of control, right? So I wanted to ask you, do you think from your experience that critics have treated filmmakers of color and of course women differently than they do white men?
Absolutely, absolutely, without a doubt, hands down. There's a radically different treatment, and again, because the critics, for the most part, do not represent what the real demographics are in terms of this country. They can't relate necessarily to the storytelling. So for example, and I'll speak from my own experience, when I created 7 Seconds, which is a show on Netflix that aired in 2018 about a Black teenager who was murdered by a white police officer. There were some lovely reviews of the show. And of course, you know, Regina King won an Emmy for it. But there was a lot of whining and moaning in the press about how depressing and dark and dirge-like the subject was. I'm not sure what they expected when you talk about a child being murdered, but it was, you know, there was this vein of kind of, it's take your medicine television and it's not worth watching because it's so depressing. While they're, you know, exclaiming joy and genius over a show that has a woman being raped multiple times, you know, where, so it was, you know, the contrast between 7 Seconds being depressing, but another show, which I won't name, where women are raped all the time and their clothes are pulled off, you know, every 5 seconds, is genius, excitement, adventure, daring, etc. Tells me exactly who that critic is. You know, tells me exactly who the critics are. It may be very exciting to a white man to have a woman raped every 5 seconds. You know, it's not to me, you know, and 7 Seconds is not depressing to me. It's an essential truth telling of what the American landscape truly is in terms of race and the police. And so, you know, it was so interesting as the filmmaker and the creator to also see the Black press react to 7 Seconds versus the white press, you know, or so-called mainstream press, and the radically different opinion both these worlds had of the show. So are the critics objective? Absolutely not. Is this a problem? Absolutely. Because then shows do not get the attention. Like you said, that gatekeeping cycle is so critical in terms of what is seen as worthy and what's seen as too depressing to watch.
And it's very curious what you're saying, and I absolutely agree with in terms of how violence against women is portrayed on screen as something that is exploited and has a certain appeal to a certain audience that we can name, is mainly male and probably mainly white. But when it comes to a show like 7 Seconds, it's shocking because it was a show dealing with police brutality, not brutality, police, you know, this maleness in the police and the secrecies and how police operates on race also in the US. So something extremely newsworthy as well, more than having, as you said, something bluntly abusing women again and again, which seems to have some morbosity that we cannot run away from.
Yeah, I mean, and what you bring up in terms of the this kind of accepted abuse of women in our most important cultural medium is really important. You know, that we are, as filmmakers, as TV makers and creators, putting out imagery that then is affecting a generation. You know, and creating Absolutely. Norms and normative behavior and destroying the self-esteem of so many women. You know, that it's really critical that we be critical about that and be very observant as we move on from this time into hopefully kind of a new time in how we look at this medium, that it's not perpetuating racism and not perpetuating violence against women.
Absolutely. And from a creator point of view, I would imagine you're very careful about how you choose your teams and how you work with other women if you create writers' room. Can you talk about that and how you make sure that everybody is on the same page, they understand? Because some women as well, even of course women creators, they need to deconstruct so many of these things that come and embed culture, and unless you have you have really thought of it in a detailed way, it will come across in your writing. It will come across in the way you perceive the world. For women, we have to do this very conscious work. And I would imagine, as someone who selects people to work with, this is always informing your decisions. Can you talk about a bit that process that you probably go through?
Yeah, I mean, part of the process for me is I do, when I'm putting together a room, I am looking for the best writers, and I'm also being very much aware of my leads in both my shows were women. So I want to have women who speak the truth about our experience. And they're outlier women in terms of the leads of the show. They're women who do not kind of go along with cultural norms in terms of womanhood. And so, you know, bad mothers, you know, sex addicts, you know, alcoholics, you know, etc. Women the good girl on television. And so, you know, women, the writers, male and female, certainly have to be keyed into the truth of underneath the mirage, you know, these cultural ridiculous mirages of who we are as women. What is the truth? You know, and with Sarah Linden and The Killing, it was really important to me as a mother myself that this holy kind of cow of motherhood be tipped over right away. You know, I didn't want a woman, a working woman who's a single mother, you know, have her hair perfect and her makeup perfect, and she's like making, you know, whatever pancakes in the morning for her kid, because that is not the experience that I've had myself as a single mom, or many women I know who are just full-time moms. You know, it's like this idea of perfection, this idea of like availability at all times is just bullshit. And I really wanted to call it out right away. And so, you know, tipping sacred cows is really not easy in Hollywood. So there was a lot of fear and worry that no one would like her because she's not a good mom and she doesn't love her kid, which I'm not sure is what the result of being kind of harried and busy and not able to like put pancakes on the breakfast table. I don't know how that equates to love, but I needed to have a team, and I did have a team who saw that. And Patty Jenkins directed the pilot of The Killing. And, you know, Patty at the time, I think her son was 3. And we were in constant conversation about how we feel as women who are still, women are still relegated as the primary caretakers of children in the society, torn constantly between our great ambitions and our, you know, obligations and our love for our children and our loneliness and being, you know, really, at least by society, seen as the one and only, if not, you know, the main ones to take care of them. So it's a small detail, but one thing Patty and I made sure happened in the pilot of The Killing, we wanted to just, on even subtle levels, destroy any notions of perfection in a household. And so this is a family with 3 children, you know, 2 very young ones and a teenager. So we told, you know, the production designer and the set deck, mess up the whole house. Like, please do not make it a television house or even a movie house. Because I watch that and I disconnect. You know, I see that on the screen.
Unreal.
I hate myself because my house doesn't look like that. So we literally would walk around, and set deck got the directive. They did what they did, and Patty and I literally would go on the set and just push things around, throw clothes, put our hands inside the cereal boxes, start eating them and talking and walking around, dropping things, because that's what kids do, you know, smudging, getting things dirty, putting dirty glasses on the thing. I want there to be reality, you know, because I think even the subtle micro moments of reality help contribute to the destruction of this false idea of a home or a family or womanhood or motherhood, you know. And so all those little things were really important, those tiny details. And there were many conversations with wardrobe, with hair and makeup, with, I mean, that's, you know, she didn't wear makeup. Holder, you know, was, Joel Kinnaman's an incredibly, you know, very handsome man. And, you know, he didn't bathe, you know, I think during the whole pilot, he let his hair get greasy. wore those clothes every day. He brought them home to the hotel, slept in them. We were all striving as much as we could to be real.
That's great. It made me think also, of course, this is where we have a long way to to work when it comes to how we portray how race is treated, right? Like the portrayal of black characters and BIPOC characters on screen is we've been doing inroads for females, for of course people like yourself and many female creators. How are we going to tackle the real experience of BIPOC, the trauma, all the things that we know, that right now conversations are there, but is the market ready to take them in as the stories we need to talk about, like really tell, and are we going to be able to incorporate this in the creation as well? You know, the gatekeeping, like we were saying, and also the creators that are not just a token of the moment, just to do something that the market now finds really shiny and appealing, right? How do we penetrate with the race situation and truth to see it on screen?
Crazy Rich Asians, Moonlight, Black Panther, like those were clear examples that the subjective ideas of what is important to audiences is subjective and not true. And so, you know, yes, the market may not be 100% recognizing it, but has to a little bit now. But more importantly, I think what you're talking about is real change that keeps the gate open permanently, you know, and not just for this season or next season, and not just a little bit. And so in order for that gate to remain open, I think it's really, again, very, very, very important to upend our notions of what is marketability, what is humanly appealing, because having sold a few shows, I know that buying decisions are human decisions, 100% human decisions. And they are not, the best buyers are thinking, do I like this? Is this a good story? You know, it's not a market formula at all. Foreign sales might be somewhat. I think foreign sales aren't either, but the great truth I have found is that it's people saying, I want to hear this story. I relate to the character. I feel that feeling. Wow. And so unless those people who do that are in the green light position, I have pitched stories with leads, people of color, you know, prior to 7 seconds, and gotten a hands down no. And then I refurbished the characters as white characters, and I got a yes. So it's really clear. You know, there's no kind of, let's have a big seminar on this. People who greenlight it, you know, people who have the power to greenlight, fund, and put something on the air and then say whether it's a worthy or not show, have to be people of color, have to be BIPOC in order for things to change, period.
Yeah. And when we find those people, we have to hold on to them, like don't lose the sight of those people, right? Those people that can actually create those changes on the ground, the decision makers that can actually make the change. We need to, those of us who believe that there is change needed, we need to almost make them our favorite people to work with, so they have an upper hand as well at times.
And I also think that it could be a little bit of a numbers game too, and goals, right? So if the studios across the board and the networks across the board look at who are in those positions, say this is unacceptable, you know, this is the definition of systemic racism because there are no Black people here or no one Asian person, we need to make so-and-so change in these executive offices by 2022, you know, by 2025. Like put in change, you know, change goals that really mean something and that aren't just talking. Because if you look at the I mean, if you look at the food chain in terms of our industry and television, at least, the writer's room is really at the bottom of the food chain.
Mm-hmm.
We are the producers, we're the worker ants, right? We create the thing, and then everyone else, funds it, distributes
Takes it
it.
away.
Yes. Another good way to put it. But we need, the writer's room needs to change, but so does everything else. So if the writer's room needs to change, what does that look like? There have to be certain hiring practices, right? That then change the writer's room versus just one guy saying, I like my friend, to be in this room. Otherwise, we'll be back where we were, 50 years ago, or 20 years ago. It has to be systemic change.
Do you think some of the conflicts that are happening between the agencies and WGA, for example, are going to benefit this landscape or actually are going to make it even more difficult?
That's a really good question. In terms of the ownership and
the diversity and the opening up and keeping not just at the lowest ranks, but actually allowing these voices to grow and become powerful.
I think it could. I mean, I think that the agencies certainly are one other entity that's in place that reinforces the systemic racism of our industry. Because again, the agencies don't represent either what the real demos are of the country, of this country. So certainly, it's less one hurdle. I think there's some informality that's happening right now amongst writers. I mean, certainly because of the pandemic, but also because so many people are not represented now by an agent. That is actually really refreshing. It's really lovely to be able to reach out to and do my own thinking, our own thinking about who, and then finding other resources to find writers. So that's really, really interesting. That's a great question. It certainly could. I know that there's some debate that right now, because so many newer writers of color are moving into the industry, that the potential strike was going to be a problem for their careers. So, I mean, it's all kind of like really, really interesting conversations in terms of diversity. I think what the Writers Guild was saying, though, and to their point, is it's a longer conversation. It's about the long game for the industry, for everyone in the industry, including writers of color, that we are not kind of yet again pushed to the bottom of the pile in terms of our earnings ability and our ownership ability, because it's always the writers of color who get, the short end of the stick. So yeah, I mean,
and pushed out of ownership, because it made me think exactly about, I May Destroy You, recently, the show in the UK with the writer, who's also the actress and the creator, say no to a big OTT because she wanted to keep ownership. And that was such a bold move that everybody started talking about. And it suddenly made and created the idea of something very different, and the idea that rebelliousness was possible. So in this whole scenario, for many of us looking at that game, of course, that somebody says, I don't want to go there, right?
Yeah, I mean, it feels like in many ways we're back in the 70s in terms of the stratification of the studio system, right? That there's so many different venues now. There's so many different places to, there's so much real estate right now that it's bringing up the opportunity for writers, and it's also making the negotiations for bigger things more possible, because there's such a need for content, especially now. And so, yeah, it's very exciting. It's a very exciting time.
Well, because we're going to have another 20 minutes and then this exciting time with the conversation with you will be gone, I'm going to just tackle the questions that people are sending, which are several. I hope that we can go through them. So the first one I have here is, do you find it different dealing with the big US networks compared to the streamers in terms of the topics being discussed today? anonymous question.
Absolutely. Yes. 100%. And I haven't been on broadcast since Cold Case. The Killing was, on cable, and then the other shows were on Netflix and Quibi on streamers. So yeah, I mean, who knows if the broadcast places are changing. I have found that because the aspiration is always for the lowest common denominator, or that whole idea of who lives in Peoria, Iowa, that the networks or the broadcasts, are going to be less risk prone, less willing to say things that will scare, I guess, Iowans. But anyway, yeah, so there's a lot more freedom, absolutely, in the streaming world than there is in broadcast.
Great. Even though it's interesting that's what happens all the time with TV, and yet TV loses audience and the streamers seem to gain audience. So at least in Europe, TVs are having to find a way to remain at the center of the conversation, and they seem to be losing the battle. So yeah. Wondering if there is space there to actually make more spaces that are more free, and actually just claim from TV the need to be a bit more daring.
From your lips to God's ears, yeah.
Another one here says, in film festivals a while back, there was a call for 50-50 by 2020 in terms of women directors. Where is the accountability? Who can make any of these people accountable? The DGA didn't, the ACLU tried, but the effect was negligible. It feels hopeless. Can you speak to this? Maria Ibrahimova.
I hear you. I mean, yes, that is probably the one sentence. Thank you for saying that. The one sentence of everything that we've talked about is how to hold our industry accountable. That is the big question. And it seems that endless advocacy, it's advocacy, internal, external advocacy, it's unions. Great idea, that the DGA has to be part of this conversation, and hopefully they will be. The DGC, all the unions have to be part of it. Yeah, I mean, let's stop talking about inclusion and start talking about accountability. That's a great
Absolutely.
way. Yeah,
that's a very good way. An anonymous question. What you said about the lack of diversity with gatekeepers, and also such as critics as well, is very interesting. What are the concrete steps that people in these roles can take to shift this mindset?
In the worlds of the entertainment journalists?
I think the person is talking about the lack of diversity with gatekeepers, what we were talking about. And if we see what are the steps that these people in this role can take to shift their mindset, I guess that what we're talking about is that the people need to be different. So I'm not sure it's just a mindset shift, but what do you think about this? It's concrete steps that people in these roles can take to shift their mindsets.
Well, certainly I think, there's, men, white men, et cetera, who feel that they're allies in this fight can certainly become deeply educated about why the industry is what it is, and et cetera, and really be clear about the male gaze, because I think that's one huge responsibility that allies can have that can help, add to the conversation of what the male gaze is constantly in the content that's being created. But again, systemic change will only come across and happen if there is actually changes in the system. And that means that there has to be more authentic representation of BIPOC and women as the gatekeepers, as the creators, and as the critics.
Well, another question here from Veena Sharma.
Can I just add one more thing? So for the allies out there, there is every hire you do from here on out, every mentorship you do, everything, maybe not 50, maybe for this next year, 100% BIPOC.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that will definitely inform different worlds, will shift biases, will do such a more tangible change if we actually go 100% to just go to the other way, and normalize real normalize real change. Like, we have to normalize real change. It can't be just an exception that we do for a certain period of time.
Yeah.
It's enough. It's almost like enough is enough.
Yes.
We see that this is, where is this. Somebody says, Vikas Sharma from India, I'm a big fan of The Killing. Thank you. What was your inspiration behind writing The Killing and the character Sarah Linden?
The biggest inspiration for Sarah Linden was writing a woman who was a woman that I know and admire, and a woman who goes to the darkest, scariest places on earth by herself. I was really interested in that. And at that time too, in the early aughts, so many women homicide detectives were, if anyone remembers, frustratingly not real at all, you know, wearing a lot of negligee type outfits and in full makeup and stilettos and mini skirts. And it just, every time I turned on the television, I felt like I was watching the Playboy channel. I was really interested in seeing a woman who looked like a real woman who I would admire, you know, and had conflict, and who was, you know, not a perfect protagonist. And in her perfection was perfect.
And then lastly, the last question I have here, it says, oh, sorry, I lost it. Here. How should a US-based BIPOC producer who is currently working in the international feature film space approach you about working together on a BIPOC lead series based on an existing property? Oh my God, people pitching things. It's tough. That's a tough one.
Yeah. I mean, I have, you know, I don't have an agent anymore in television, but I do have my management, Anonymous Content. So
great
for business.
So IMDb Pro and a management for Veena will do if you go through there. I hope it's that answers the question. Well, we are very close from being finished. I wanted to ask you about your latest show, the Quibi one, which I couldn't watch, and how was that journey of writing in short form, and what do you think is there anything that you could share with us about your process, and how did you feel about that format?
I mean, it was really a incredibly affirming experience to do, because I've done a lot of television, and I really did not want to do another series at all. And so it's a bit of a hybrid of a film. You know, it was a film production schedule, and the running time is, you know, a film, you know, running time, but it's chopped into tiny episodes of 10 minutes or less. And so it was almost like bits, like it was almost like a serialized drama from like the 1950s in a movie theater, where you just got a tiny bit and then you came back again for the next bit and the next bit. And so there was a natural kind of propulsive need in the storytelling, which for me, who likes slow, quiet, slow burn, unfolding at a snail's pace of drama, it was just a whole new type of sandbox to play in. And it opened up this whole idea, which I became really excited about talking to Quibi and talking to Jeffrey Katzenberg about, is what these devices that we have on our bodies now, you know, at all times, and we wake up to, and we go to sleep to, and, you know, everyone across the world, from LA to New York to like the tiny town my mother lives in the Philippines, the minute we get that ding ding, that text tone, we all have the same kind of endorphin rush. So it's a new system of potentially watching content, but it's the Wild West, right? It's already kind of neurologically like wrapped up in our daily experience. So how could filmmakers or storytellers or anybody use this device to then tell stories. And already that's happening, you know, obviously TikTok and YouTube and different lengths, you know, webisodes. But how could you tell very high quality stories and then also reframe the devices of storytelling and rethink maybe even the structure of storytelling? So all that to say, my biggest takeaway that I could actually do this time around was how to tell a story in small bites, create a propulsive element, and not be repetitive. And really just, it's almost being on a giant football field that's like a quarter of the length that you're used to and juking really quickly left and right. Um, and so all the other things that I speak of, though, are things for the future that I think are really, really interesting. It's a whole other type of screen that has almost nothing to do with the big screen and the small screen that we're used to.
And the last one now, a lot of people come from cinema and want to go into serialized content, and you started in serialized content but now are moving into cinema more and more. I wanted to know if that's by design, because you are, like you said, you don't want to write any other series, and this is your actual passion, and this is how long it took you to get there, or is it just because of a moment right now? I would love to know more about your move into cinema and what's next for you as a cinema director.
Yeah, I've always been so passionate about film. I mean, that was my first love as a 10-year-old. When I first saw, you know, PBS in the town I grew up in Ohio, because they would show films unedited. So I got to see really old. I got to see The Deer Hunter unedited. I got to see Zeffirelli's Romeo and Juliet with the nude scenes. I mean, it was just unheard of in Ohio, right? But it set a course of just great love for great filmmaking. And I fell in love with television, though, too. I fell in love with the novelistic storytelling that I was so lucky to be able to watch in the 90s, like The Sopranos and Oz. And then I got to write that. And so the joy of writing a life, you know, that exists over many years and not just over 90 minutes is in of itself its own kind of beautiful thing. I've done that for a while. And so, you know, I'm just, you know, the dog who needs a new bone, you know, every few years. So a way to come back, a challenge. You know, I'd like to be a student and not know, and be a beginner. I love that feeling of just learning again, really, really learning the things I don't know. So that's been joy, such joy, you know, to be able to do that and start again.
Well, this has been great. Thank you so much, Veena. I really admire you, and I really appreciate you took the time. I see my journalist self connects with your journalist self for sure, and the writer that you are and the creator that you are. It gives me a lot of inspiration, a lot of hope. So thank you so much for your work. I can't wait to see your films, and I look forward to seeing you again, maybe one day in person again. But in any case, thanks a lot for this time. It's been extremely generous of you, and I'm really, really honored. I have, somebody's sending me one more question. What's going on, this? People, we just have, thank you, ladies. This was really great. That wasn't a question. Thank you. All right. I just want to say thanks to you, Veena, really. And also, I just want to close this conversation telling everyone to remember that every day we're doing different talks until the 20th. Don't miss tomorrow's talk. And please feel free to send questions, write your social media, and share the conversations that will all be taped and will be shared from tomorrow or maybe from later today in the YouTube page of Cinelink and also of Screen Daily. Tomorrow we have political correctness, freedom, and self-censorship at 4 p.m. And I am doing another panel at 7 p.m. European time, 10 a.m. Los Angeles time, and on anti-racism and white supremacy. And will the market catch up with much needed change? We're going to talk about that tomorrow again. Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody. Stay well. Be safe. Bye. Bye-bye.